Today we're going to be talking about Humboldt County. That's where I grew up, and it's very interesting. If you look at the map, Humboldt County, California is almost to the border with Oregon. I think there might be one more county between Humboldt County and the Oregon line, but it's pretty close. In a lot of ways, Humboldt County is really unique. In that area along the coast of Northern California and Southern Oregon is where we have the redwood trees. Yes, the redwood trees. The redwood trees are a cousin to the giant sequoia trees, but they only grow in that area, which is a subtropical climate. And if you go 30 miles inland, you don't see them anymore. There's literally a line where the climate changes to a more dry inland climate, and there are no more redwood trees. These are the oldest and tallest and widest trees known to man. Home to national parks and state parks, people come from all over the world to do ecotourism and see the big trees. Movies have been filmed there. Look up Fern Canyon sometime on the internet, or the drive-through tree. The beaches too are amazing. Humboldt County has the largest stretch of wilderness coastline outside of Alaska in the U.S. in an area called the Lost Coast. Yeah, so you're almost up there on the border with Oregon. I think there might be one county in between Humboldt County and Oregon, but it's more Oregon than Los Angeles. Having grown up there, as well as having returned there through various times in my adult life, I've seen the ideological battles play out fiercely, like a microcosm of the entire country and world. Humboldt County has long been known as the primary manufacturer of medical marijuana. It's a lot of the documentaries that have come out worldwide about pot in California, like on Discovery Channel and different places. They talk about Humboldt County and show scenes of those small towns. So it's our claim to fame. I don't fly that flag, and I'll explain a little bit why, but I don't know if since 2016 other parts of California have maybe replaced Humboldt County in terms of psychoactive cannabis production, but certainly Humboldt County got its day in the sun in the news, and these documentaries about legal and illegal pot, because that was its main export. If anything, since 2016, and a big part of that was the medical marijuana laws, but also because it is such a rural area, you could grow pot under the radar. And we always heard that Humboldt County was famous for this, but growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was very, very far from our reality. From what I gather, since 2016, there has been a decline in terms of comparing it with other counties, just because the new rules and regulations make the mom and pop farming operations almost impossible. Water regulations, permits, fines. So the so-called legalization of recreational cannabis was just a giveaway for big business. Sometimes people will ask me about this or come and tell me that cannabis is legal in California. Or they even, ironically, they say the whole United States, but that's something they don't get in Latin America, that each state has its own laws. But they'll come and they'll ask me if cannabis is illegal in California, and because this is what they have been spoon-fed by the media in Ecuador, it's very hard for them to hear that no. It's very difficult for me to tell them this. They want a 5-second answer, that it's not true. I don't care what the media says, not by a long shot. Remember, when we're talking about cannabis, there are many branches of the plant. And I read the laws for legalizing recreational cannabis in 2016. They actually wrote in a new prohibition of hemp, reinstitutionalizing it and permanentizing it. I mean, there was zero ambiguity about what they were doing. Part of this is because those who have been planting psychoactive cannabis as opposed to industrial cannabis. They don't want hemp seeds blowing in the wind and cross-pollinating with their pot plants and thus bringing down the level of THC, the psychoactive ingredient. But also wanting to have your plants that have the highest level of THC possible, tetrahydrocannabinol, the psychoactive ingredient. That's also a function of prohibition, just like how during the prohibition of alcohol, nobody wanted to make beer because you could make more money selling whiskey. But like, so what if there's a hemp seed blown in the wind, a female plant or a male plant, I don't know. There's some concern that they're going to be cross-pollinating, and then you have your cross-pollination between your hemp and your marijuana. I don't have a problem with saying marijuana if you want to talk about psychoactive cannabis, but the word too, that it represents the racist nature of this reefer madness, and we don't really have language in place that permits us to talk about the different branches of cannabis because there is no other plant that has all the uses. But another reason that they reinstitutionalized and made permanent the prohibition of hemp in 2016 is because of this ideology about the limits of growth, what is ironically called sustainable development, and this whole idea of deindustrialization. It's very strong in Humboldt County, so thick you can cut it with a knife. Look, we wouldn't speak of cotton being legal in a state where the only permitted use was for toilet paper. Of course not. To say this is to make a mockery of the language. Yet we permit this kind of chatter when we talk about hemp. When speaking about cannabis, rather. We permit this kind of wording when speaking about cannabis. Hemp and cannabis are the same plant. The only difference that makes a separate distinction between marijuana and hemp is the level of THC. And actually that definition was written into the Hemp Farm Bill of 2019, which we're going to be talking about in a second. But smoking cannabis is the least useful of the uses of the plant, with cloth and cardboard and rope and paper being the traditional uses of hemp, and as American as apple pie. So I'm not pro-marijuana, I'm pro-hemp. And look, a few years ago, I was reading a local magazine that was produced in Humboldt County where they were interviewing a Humboldt County girl who had gone on nationally to become a hemp activist, working for hemp awareness. But then at the end of the article, this is very telling. They asked her at the end of the article what she thought about growing hemp in California, and she said, "I'm very careful about advocating for hemp growing in Humboldt County because I don't think there is enough land and resources to do it on." I thought to myself, is this woman crazy? Has she lost her mind? Most of Humboldt County right now, as it was 100 years ago, is in the hands of private logging companies. Imagine that. Most of Humboldt County is off limits to the ordinary citizen. This also gives Humboldt County a mysterious atmosphere, like, what's over there? What's over there? With huge parts of the county actually being cut off. The ratio of wilderness to community is really high, like not even close by comparable standards with other counties. Satellite imagery of the state shows Humboldt County as the one place that's just completely dark, since most of the land is in the hands of the timber industry. After they cut down the trees, are they allowed to build houses or grow hemp? Nope, they're not. What about the free market? What about letting the free market decide if Humboldt County can grow hemp or not? We don't have a free market. We have free market fantasies. This woman, this hemp activist, has so drunk the wine of its human's job to limit growth, to control, to not expand. She didn't even care about like letting the free market. What about having freedom? It's not whether you advocate for hemp growing in Humboldt County or not. It's just letting people be free to do whatever they want. But it's like she couldn't control herself from putting her foot in and wanting to limit growth. Many people have good motives in terms of environmentalism, water use, and so on, but they've gone too far. Whereas I feel so strongly that the way out of the environmental crisis is through innovation, development, and growth. I grew up in the shadow of the Samoa pulp mill, where they turned wood to pulp. My father worked there when he was in college, and I could see it from our house where it was across the bay because of the smokestacks. The first settlers to Humboldt County had been sailors, and they named the beach Samoa because they had been to Polynesia, and the landscape reminded them of the Samoa Islands. Every morning we would see the smokestack from the Samoa pulp mill, especially if it was a clear day. It was very controversial. Eventually they closed it around 2014 because of the big trees. Because of the big trees, there have always been environmental activists in Humboldt County. And the timber industry logs right up to the border with the national parks. It's called clear cutting, and it's very controversial. But they don't talk about the fact that our laws allow the timber industry to continue to function as it has for over 100 years. The purpose of the mill was to turn wood into dust for making paper. Every morning you would see the white cloud of the smokestacks fading out in the wind. It was a fake cloud. It had an effect on air quality, which was why they eventually shut it down. What about making paper out of hemp so you don't need a pulp mill? See, these are macro level questions that people are too afraid to ask. And because they have lack of original thought and the ideology of the limits of growth, that is enough to close them down. Very dangerous combination. What about making paper out of hemp so you don't need a pulp mill? That's not a conversation we're allowed to have. Even though for hundreds of years in the United States, from before the United States was even a country, they made paper out of hemp. And I guess that probably the redwood trees, you get more money out of them for making tables and desks and beds and houses than making paper. So I don't know if the Samoa hemp mill use redwood trees specifically to make into dust for paper. That's not the point I'm making. The point is about the use of trees for paper when we don't need that, and also about the fake clouds, which we'll see in a minute is very relevant to Humboldt County today. In California, there's something called the grandfather clause, which says you cannot build houses on your own land. If you sell a property, you have to sell it without any new houses on it. Each piece of land has to have the same amount of houses that it had when you acquired the property. So therefore, the timber companies can never and will never be able to divest their land to other things. There can be no spontaneous urban development like we see here in Ecuador. Everything has to stay the same. Cities have emerged over the last 30 years here in Ecuador because farmers figured out they can make more money building houses on their land and selling the houses. But in California, and especially in Humboldt County, everything has to stay the same. If you sell your property and you subdivide it, you have to have it written into the contract that there will be no houses on the land you divide up. If somebody tries to build a house, the government will come, they will find you, and they will tear it down. It may even take you to jail. It's prohibited as part of what's called the grandfather clause. In Humboldt County, you can buy hemp products. You can buy products that are made of hemp. Hemp cereal, hemp oil. hemp underwear, but it says made in Canada, or made in Germany, or made in Romania. American farmers lose out. According to the 2019 Farm Bill, which I mentioned earlier, American farmers can purchase permits to grow hemp, but you don't revise an ancient industry through pilot programs. And whenever I speak about this or write about this, somebody says to me that now hemp is legal, but I don't agree because it's just a variation of the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act of 1939. And farmers say that it's still not economically viable until all regulations are dropped. The prejudice and the lies about hemp have had an enormous effect on Latin American policy towards drugs. And you see this with the debates about hemp in the national assemblies. And if you took a survey of most people in Latin America, they wouldn't even know what hemp is. Same in the United States. I mean, I mentioned about hemp to my brother and my father. They'd never heard of it before. The prejudice and the lies about hemp have had enormous effect on Latin American policy towards drugs and even to the question of micro-trafficking, which is a big deal in the schools here, and the confusion between marijuana and cocaine, big influence on policy. And it all goes back to what we believe, often erroneously, about hemp. And since the cotton industries and the oil industries are very strong, they don't want any alternative to synthetic fibers that are based on petroleum products, alternatives like hemp. And so all we hear about when we try and raise awareness of this issue is drugs, drugs, drugs. My contention is that marijuana was prohibited because of its relationship to hemp, although most people will tell you that they think it was the other way around, that hemp had to be prohibited because of its relation to marijuana. We know from looking at history that cannot be the case, and there's a lot of evidence to prove that. Look, if we care about environmentalism in a deep sense, not just virtue signaling, these are questions we cannot afford to ignore. Because of concern about air quality, they finally closed the Samoa pulp mill. And now, no more infamous smokestacks. I think actually there's a marijuana farm that's there. But, I mean, they were talking about moving one in. I don't know if they finally did or not, because then I left Humboldt County and moved back to Ecuador. But it's interesting. You can go online and you can see what the smokestacks look like. This white cloud. But one fake cloud has been replaced by far more pernicious, evil fake clouds, where geoengineering is the biggest elephant in the room. That is something that environmental activists won't touch, partly from a philosophy now that the sun is bad. And so any blocking out of it is actually a good thing. You know, and they have these marches. We believe in science, protesting Donald Trump from withdrawing the United States from these climate treaties, as if this means he doesn't believe in science. So what does it mean, though, to believe in science? It's just words for them. The Samoa pulp mill and its notorious smokestacks was nothing in comparison to what we have now. And it's like complaining some cows are pooping in a river, meanwhile you pump an entire city's worth of sewage into the river upstream. And it's deny, deny, deny. I used the analogy before of a town that has a very activist fire department, and they're always making themselves out to be heroes. They do high-profile simulations of putting out fires. You know how certain buildings are designated by fire departments to practice putting out fires. So they'll set buildings on fire and they practice it. And anybody who criticizes the fire department is called anti-fire department. And these are our heroes. Meanwhile, the fire department actually goes around setting fire to buildings so that they can come in and sell the solutions and they can be seen as heroes. That's what it's like in Humboldt County, where the environmental activists are so paranoid about global warming that they don't care that there's this cloud layer that's put up of highly toxic chemical dust, of which the Samoa pulp mill was nothing in comparison. Like I said, it's like complaining that cows are pooping in a river while you pump an entire city's worth of sewage into upstream. It's a false flag attack. The hypocrisy is overwhelming as the military flights loop and circle our skies all day long. One time there was actually a circle that was left in Eureka, and it caused people to make inquiries, and official bodies declared it was military. But the short, bright bursts from low-flying airplanes, probably drones, that doesn't cause an uproar. And actually, there are geoengineers like Kim Caldera that come to Humboldt County and give lectures about we need to do geoengineering. Now, they're not going to admit that there's geoengineering going on right now. In fact, if you suggest that much, they'll call you crazy. But the philosophy that this is something we got to do, since it's there, you can't but think that it's what's causing them to see no evil, hear no evil. Look, I used to watch the flights when I was a boy in the 1980s, and I saw the trails dissipate after a minute or so, not stay in the sky all day long. And those with a flight tracker app see that there aren't air traffic from commercial flights, since we aren't near any commercial airport. And if you're on top of a mountain somewhere, it's not logical to say that, the airplanes we see are just commercial air traffic, because those airplanes follow a predictable pattern. But it's hard to talk about this because they are adding contaminants to commercial air fuel, to the fuel that's used on commercial flights. They are adding it. And we see in the geoengineering proposals that they say, as well as sending fleets of modified business jets up into the sky to spray, to block out the sun, they say that they should also add contaminants to the fuel of commercial air traffic, and this would help more chemicals to be in the sky to block out the sun. They actually say this in their proposals. The problem is those that criticize you for talking about geoengineering, they're not looking at the science magazines and the degree programs which are focused on geoengineering. So there's a great gap between what people know about geoengineering. So, and it's especially true in Eureka. It's become ground zero for experiments related to climate engineering. And can we blame them for targeting Humboldt County when the people allow it? I think it's a good question to ask is if the philosophy about global warming that the environmental activists have in Humboldt County is actually what prevents them from having any outcry about the current air quality. Because these are also the people who are actively calling for geoengineering. But the weather of Humboldt County is just in a vice. They're not letting it be natural. So we don't know how climate change really would have affected our weather patterns. And it's a subtropical climate, which is found nowhere else in the world, this kind of climate. It's very sensitive, and it's going to be very sensitive to changes that are caused by man. And I just think that it's horrible. It's having grown up there and felt very connected to the nature. It's like my worst nightmare. It's like living in the Twilight Zone. You try to talk about this and nobody cares. They say you're crazy. So also the whole thing about the limits of growth and sustainable development and having to have everything stay the same as it was and zero change going forward into the future. this is also what prevents the logging companies from freeing up some of the land and being able to do something else with it and start new communities. So if you're connected with Humboldt County, or if you know anybody, please share this video. And because the ideological battles that I saw in Humboldt County is microcosm of what's going on in the entire country and the world. Thanks for watching as we take it one step over the line.